A few weeks ago, I talked about our responsibility for advocacy and how we're animated by a deep conviction that we have a role in it and a responsibility. However, much of the research that I've shared with you focuses on the responsibilities of those who head our libraries and our library boards and their high-level colleagues. Does that mean that it's all up to them and that the rest of us have only a minor role or maybe no role at all? Well, of course not. We have many examples of outstanding success out there. In fact, libraries have a long tradition of local and national and international advocacy for their communities and for the public interest at all levels. Let's go back to the first week. It's an assumption of this course that no advocacy strategy can compensate for a poor experience with actual libraries. If we go to decision makers for funds and other kinds of support, but what they've been hearing is that the library service is unfriendly or poor, our case is not going to rise above that damage. On the other hand, if our decision makers have been hearing good stories from members and others, there's a consistency and a resonance that's very powerful in advocacy. And our case can't be narrow or sound self-serving ever. It's essential that others in the community speak for the library and not just the library's leaders or staff. In fact, it's actually much better when the community is speaking for the library. There are two rules for effectiveness when many voices are speaking for the library on the ground. First, the message has to be consistent right across the board. That can be a serious challenge. Here's a simple example. Some members of a community may believe that the highest priority is to retain and strengthen all the existing locations of a multi-branch system. Others may believe that fewer and larger branches that are open more hours are the priority. When there are conflicting or inconsistent messages, we should not be surprised when the decision makers are confused or worse, totally tuned out. The second rule is that the advocacy has to focus on the benefit to the community that owns the library. It can never sound as if the staff own the library. Staff may and usually do have a passionate commitment, but if their advocacy carries any air of entitlement, as in entitlement to funding or entitlement to our jobs, it's going to fall flat. It has to be about the community's entitlement without exception. That doesn't mean that the rank and file have no role, far from it. In fact, staff members are the heart and soul of the relationship with the community. The most frequent stumbling block to grassroots advocacy is simply knowing how to do it. And we haven't really been very good at equipping either our frontline staff or our friends and supporters for basic grassroots advocacy. Remembering the power of consistency and the dangers of sounding self-serving, there are some good models out there to inform us. The people who work in our libraries are overwhelmingly supportive of their mission, and they are in a position to hear and to pass along powerful stories, especially stories of transformative impact, the kind that we shared at the beginning of the course. They're also among the most credible ambassadors and connectors, not just in working with library members, but in all their other connections, in committees and in panels and in the broader community. What's often missing is a plan for engagement of these strengths for the best impact, a plan that involves their contributions and helps them learn best practice. The American Library Association has created some frontline advocacy resources for different types of libraries: public, school, college and university, and special, including government, corporate, and other special libraries. These toolkits are freely available on the Advocacy University part of the ALA website, and you can adapt them to your own circumstances. They explain the role and importance of frontline advocacy, and they help staff who don't necessarily see themselves as advocates or who may struggle with the professional confidence to do it, to understand how well they can advance the library's cause every day. There's a document called 6 Good Excuses That Won't Work that can particularly help people to get over their personal hesitations. Though these tools are still too new to have been evaluated through formal research on impacts, I think they have a lot of promise. They can have particular value in helping to lift our sights outward. When many staff become anxious about the fate of libraries, the natural reaction can be perhaps to turn inward and to defend and protect. The risk, again, is to begin to sound self-serving. This is an advocacy killer, as we know, because it focuses on what we love and value and not what our potential supporters and decision makers care about. These frontline advocacy campaigns are obviously going to be most effective when they have a high rate of staff participation in their creation and when they are carefully and sensitively adapted to the library's own environment. One example of such a campaign is provided by the Edmonton Public Library in Alberta, where staff members created a program to show their colleagues how to talk up the library, how to put a springboard story together. Remember the springboard story from week 1. And to do an elevator speech, which we covered in week 4. The Edmonton plan also advances the library's Spread the Words slogan. They made it fun and easy and interesting, and they have generously agreed to share their toolkit with the participants in this course as a handout. For a highly strategic model for the engagement of grassroots advocacy, we can look at the Friends of the St. Paul, Minnesota Public Library. This group has been extraordinarily successful in raising funds and in nurturing advocacy for the library. Peter Pearson, who is president of the Friends Group, recounts the work of the group in the guest video interview of this week and singled out the main pillars of success. First, the strategic focus of each year's Friends activity is first discussed with the chief librarian, so that the Friends are advocating for what the library actually needs. However, the chief librarian bows out of the picture once the Friends have been informed of the library's needs, so the chief librarian is removed from citizen lobbying. Third, the plan engages influencers. The board members of the Friends Group are known community leaders, familiar with and respected by the city's decision makers, experienced in community relationships, and the Friends ensure that their cause is also covered by the neighborhood newspapers that are known to influence the city council. And fourth, when it comes to budget time, there are no surprises and no strangers. The large grassroots turnout in support of the library's budget request really makes the library's cause stand out as actively endorsed by the whole community. Edmonton Public Library also makes effective use of grassroots advocacy. It briefs candidates for municipal office with an information kit about the library. And it supplies residents with lawn signs that say, "I heart EPL." In the last election, candidates for municipal election couldn't help but notice that the library had more lawn signs than any candidates. Another example of grassroots advocacy is summarized by Liz Kerr of the Ontario Library Association. Liz mentions in her video interview a number of things that all who care about school libraries can do. Talk to their neighborhood principal, for example. In our next video, we're going to look at media relations and optimal use of social media.